Populism and COVID. I'd like to invite to the stage Jack Posobiec. He's a correspondent and host for One American News Network and the Special Projects Director for the Citizens for Trump, the largest Trump grassroots organization in the United States. Jack is a veteran intelligence officer of the United States Navy with multiple deployments overseas. He's written 2 nonfiction books, Citizens for Trump, The Inside Story of the People's Movement to Take Back America, and 4D Warfare, A Doctrine for a New Generation of Politics. David Silverman was an atheist activist for 24 years, serving as president of the American Atheists and executive director of the Atheist Alliance International. Silverman created the Reason Rally in 2012, the largest atheist gathering in history. And his book, Fighting God, an Atheist Manifesto for a Religious World, was rated the best atheist book of the year. His video channel is Firebrand for Good, and he speaks on truth, data, and humanism. Then there's this guy, Mike Harlow. Mike Harlow is a writer, artist, and filmmaker for NYC. Next year, Harlow is launching Red Band, an uncancelable production company and platform for entertainment that goes against the grain. Harlow is ardent in his activism of free speech, nonconformity, and challenging the culture of the pious LGBT establishment, taking the homo out of homogenous.
Thank you.
And of course, the moderator, who everybody came to see. Melissa Chen is the current managing director at Ideas Beyond Borders and editor at Global Conversations. She studied computational biology at Massachusetts Institute of Technology and computational biology at Boston University. She worked at a Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. Woo!
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Okay, is this on? Well, thank you guys for being here. Very, very glad to be able to moderate this panel. Just wanted to say also that I found out that Jack is actually completely fluent in Mandarin last night, so 欢迎. Yep,
早上好，谢谢。
And just like Jack is a veteran of the United States Navy, Dave is a veteran of the war on Christmas. So thank you. And Mikey is a really good friend of mine. We're actually friends in real life, and he's one of the funniest people I know. So, all right, let's get cracking. Today, you know, we're here, and it's kind of almost jarring to be in person because we've all been cooped up at home for like better part of 2020. So, as if, you know, why not talk about the actual thing that has been dominating news cycles for the whole year? We're going to be talking about COVID and populism, which is actually a pretty big deal because this year it's an election year. I'm going to kind of define populism first, just so that people kind of have an idea. We're all on the same page before we get in. Populism tends to have a very bad name in the press, but what it really is it's a political doctrine that sort of supports the voice and the rights of sort of common people against an elite class. So that's the definition we're going to go with. And by the way, the elites can be anything from like the media, government, institutions, basically. People in power. All right, so before the pandemic, let's go back to like, I don't know, sometime in January, February. I happen to notice that populists were the first ones to kind of sound the alarm. You know, they said, we got to take this seriously. And I'm meaning Mike Cernovich, Steve Bannon, and Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan. These are people who are populist in their ideologies, but they were also the ones who kind of, you know, went against the grain because the media kind of failed on this, and so did government. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you guys think, you know, we can start with Jack or with David, up to you guys, and kind of go, maybe let's go down. If you have something to add, you know, we'll just have the conversation like that. It will flow.
Yeah, so I was actually working with those guys very early on this, and from my perspective, it was interesting how So I come to this as not just a sort of a member of the populist community, but also, as you mentioned, I've been a very long time a China analyst. And so reading the Chinese internet, Chinese social media, that's always been something that I've kind of had one hand in, even along with everything else that's going on in the world. And I remember in early January, there were all of these posts suddenly coming up out of Wuhan, talking about lockdowns and some kind of virus and some kind of illness. And then there were doctors being arrested and people accused of spreading rumors. And it's actually kind of amazing because we talk about misinformation and people being banned on social media now for misinformation, but people in China were banning people for misinformation in January because they were sounding the alarm about the virus. And so I was translating these videos and throwing them up onto English side social media and pointing out that, guys, if you understand the way the Chinese government works, the Chinese regime works, they're not going to admit fault. They're not going to admit that something has gone wrong unless they've tried as hard as possible to cover it up, because they're trying to maintain face, they're also trying to maintain legitimacy. And so if it had gotten to the point where I realized that they were admitting it, even on a regional level, then I knew that there had to be something going on. So I first started sounding the alarm. I actually worked with the podcast that Steve Bannon runs called War Room Pandemic. We launched that on January 25th of this year, talking about what was going on, calling for a shutdown of international travel. And to me, it's actually quite interesting that now we know that China knew they had a problem as early as November. And yet, while they were shutting down internal travel within the various cities of China, the various provinces, they didn't shut down international travel. And so that travel between China and Europe, China and the United States, both West Coast and East Coast, that was still continuing, and they've never really provided a good explanation for this. Yet at the same time, when you talk about institutions, the WHO was parroting Beijing's line that no human-to-human transmission, don't need to worry about this, you're just being alarmist. People in the media were accusing us of xenophobia and every name under the sun, when we're merely just looking at the facts on the ground and saying, hey, it looks like there's a problem here. And then other people started bringing up the fact that since so much of our manufacturing and our supply chains are based in China, if China is locking down, what is that going to do for our economy? And this is something that economic populists have talked about for such a long time. We're right here in the heartland. We're here in a place that has seen so many jobs and that manufacturing base be outsourced all around the world, but specifically and predominantly to China. And so realizing that we can't make our own medicine anymore. We couldn't make masks, right? Remember early on, masks and PPE was such an issue and they were trying to prevent it. Even Dr. Fauci says, when they ask him, they say, how come you were anti-mask originally? He said, he says, well, actually, I was worried about hoarding because we don't have stockpiles of masks. So even he is tacitly admitting that we have problems in our supply chain, and it's due to these issues. All of this, the rise of China, the loss of the manufacturing base, understanding what the Chinese regime was doing, it falls directly in line with what populists have been saying for just about a decade now.
Right.
So was China also buying up PPE in that time frame?
They were, actually. So China was instituting this policy through, and I could go through all the details, but they have something called the United Front Work Department, and they operate out of, they're sort of an overseas influence directional campaign that Xi Jinping has really ramped up in the past 5 years or so. And they're not this small department. I'm talking like 40,000 people work for this thing. I mean, remember, it's China, right? People, labor value is quite less there. And so they were orchestrating this idea from campuses, the Confucius Institutes, Chinese consulates. Global News in Canada did a whole expose on this. It was fantastic. If you haven't read it, please go read that in Global News. And from Tokyo to Vancouver to New York, they were sending out these signals, sending messages saying on social media or on their various listservs, buy PPE, buy the N95 masks, and send them back to the motherland for the strength and the power of China. So even the stuff that was here in January and February, where they were telling the world that there's nothing to worry about, they were telling their overseas citizens to hoard PPE to send it back to China, and
While-
then they could sell it back to us.
While they were not restricting international travel, but they were restricting domestic travel.
That's correct.
So this sounds pretty malicious.
That's absolutely right, and I'm not one of those people who necessarily thinks that this was I don't think this was a bioweapon or something
Right.
like that. I do think this was something went horribly wrong, obviously, and the direct origins are certainly murky, but I don't think this is something that was planned. That being said, the response to it certainly had an element of maliciousness to it, certainly.
So I'm going through this process. I was far left, and then everything blew up, and I started moving over to the right as a result, as I started to become more and more aware of the dishonesty coming from the left. And what has helped me along this, very interestingly, is that I cut the cable cord in January. Just coincidentally, I cut cable, and this has been really instrumental to me, because now I don't listen to networks. I don't watch networks anymore. I watch videos. I get my news from videos. So all of a sudden, I've gone from watching MSNBC or CNN and sometimes Fox News to being able to watch what Fox News says about this and what CNN says about the same thing and what MSNBC says about the same thing. And then I can look at the raw footage. And this is what's been shoving me over to the right fairly well. And when this whole thing started out, I was watching the people react. And when we talk about populism, there's two kinds of populism here. There's the populism of the president, where it's us, America, against everyone else. And there's the populism of the far left, which is the millionaires and the billionaires against the common people. And and of course, the millionaires and the billionaires, well, one of them's in the White House, right? So I kind of watched this trap happen. What I saw when the populist leader of America said, everything's all right, there's no problem, because that's what populist leaders do. That's what Bolsonaro did too. And then when it turned out that COVID was a real thing, the other populists snapped and said, aha, and started, and so that's kind of really, it's really pushed the divide between us. We've got competing populisms in this country.
Left and right.
We've got competing bad guys, and one of the bad guys is in the White House. For one of the populists, for one of the one of the bad guys is in the White House, and when he makes a mistake, that's why they close on him. That's why there's such an attack on him. So, I mean, it's just been really interesting to me to watch the left explode every time the right does something a little bit off. And they're just, I don't know where it's going to go from here. I'm glad we're having this panel, because I don't know where it's going to go from here. We have two competing populists. We have two competing, populi, yeah, populists, populi.
I think it's populi.
Smart.
And it's really interesting to watch because they hate each other.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mike, when did you kind of get wind of COVID? Because, you're very online, and
Where I'm not banned.
it's true. He's
Well,
banned from
first I
Twitter.
just want to say thanks for having me. When I heard I was on this panel, I was like, what am I doing here? Because I'm with three brilliant, iconic intellectuals. What the hell do I know? But I think the reason that I wanted to do this is to sort of give a voice to all of you, of fellow people who don't know anything and are trying to figure it out, which is really so impossible if you consider the media landscape that we're in, where we've just been lied to and lied to and lied to so many times, and it seems that it's corrupted every single institution, from science to media to academia to medicine. How does one educate themselves on this? So that's sort of what I hope to get at. But no, for me, I hate to admit, but I was totally one of those people who initially was like, oh yeah, whatever. And I think the reason that a lot of people felt that way is because we've just been lied to for so long, because we've heard one hysteria after another, especially the last couple of years, that when something serious eventually does happen, you tune it out because you don't know the difference between something like COVID and something like the Russians are coming.
The North Korea war.
Yeah, yeah.
My-
World
my-
War
my
III,
favorite-
World
my
War
favorite-
IV,
My favorite
World
new
War
one
V.
is Trump is stealing the mail.
Oh God, I know.
Taylor Swift will save us. Don't worry, everyone.
All right, but like, so populists were, you know, they hate to be they hate to be unpopular, right? And basically, COVID-19 was a crisis that brought nothing but really bad news, death, economic recession. But the thing is that now that we're in the midst of the pandemic, it looks like the populists were able to kind of react early, right? They caught it. But the problem was governance. So if you look at populist countries like Brazil, Bolsonaro's Brazil, or you know even Trump and Boris Johnson to some extent in the UK, they played down the pandemic a lot in the beginning because it's uncomfortable to enact policies, right? Because they're populist. And it looks like the liberal democracies kind of handled it. The technocratic liberal democracies handled it pretty well. You're looking at places like South Korea, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and Angela Merkel in Germany. So do you think that populism is kind of shown, like, do you think that people are getting sort of jaded about populist leaders because they've demonstrated almost just by looking at just COVID numbers, like death rates, that there's an inability to govern? I mean, when you don't have the trust of institutions, it's kind of hard to govern. Do you think that's the case?
No, it is to an extent, but I do become very wary of when anyone is comparing country to country situations because there are so many apples to oranges situations. I mean, the United States is not Europe. The United States is certainly not New Zealand, which is an island. It is not South Korea or any of the Asian nations that have a long history of dealing with outbreaks, with dealing with pandemics. You have very different levels of sort of, being used to, the idea of masks, right? So, as someone who spent a lot of time living in Asia, but also being American, is mask culture is the norm in most of Asia. They say, oh, there's a pandemic coming out. All right, the masks come out, right? You just do it. It's automatic. It's not even a question. Whereas in the United States, I can remember as early as even just a few months ago where you would see people mocking Asians for wearing masks, in an airport or on an airplane or on a train or something because that's just considered normal. But it's also a different type of situation because when you ask them, you say, why are you wearing a mask? And then you realize it's, from their perspective, it's not, I'm wearing my mask because I think the world is dirty or something. It's no, because maybe they're sick and they don't want other people to get that illness. And so it's actually like valuing community and putting others' values ahead. And so it's been so interesting for me because I have been traveling throughout the pandemic, even though you're not supposed to. So I went out to Chaz. I did some undercover work there. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, not a lot of social distancing going on in Chaz.
It's okay when they do it.
No, there were masks, but they were different from COVID masks. It was the guys with guns and hoods and.
It was
and
more
other
ISIS-y.
things. Yeah, the kind of ninja almost, I would say. Remember Foot Clan from the Ninja Turtles? Kind of those guys, but without the discipline. And
Or the showers.
did they take shower? I don't know. And then and so I noticed very early on. I mean, it's great at first because I was like the only person on a plane. But I've also noticed that, and to get back to your question, is that populists do tend more to ride the wave of public sentiment. And so early on, there was a lot of denialism, and there still is denialism. But now there's alarmism, right? And that's the opposite end. And I don't consider myself a denier or an alarmist. I say, like, okay, what's going on? What's the situation? And so then I also traveled. I was in Tulsa. I traveled as well to South Dakota, did Mount Rushmore for the 4th of July. It's awesome, by the way. Highly recommend if you can get to Mount Rushmore. It's actually really cool. It's not just like, kitschy and cheesy like you might think from some of the T-shirts. And I noticed that people are starting to deal with it, and people are starting to get to the point where, okay, they understand that there is something going on. They understand that it is affecting a certain, demographic swath of our country, but that also doesn't mean that we can't take reasonable risk assessment and individual choice to go about our lives. I mean, we do, and it's not apples to oranges, but we understand that there are risks when you get on an airplane. We understand there's risk when you get in a car. We understand there's risks when you do various things. And so yes, it made sense, of course, to pause, reassess where we were when the pandemic first hit, but now you see people traveling more, you see people interacting more, things are starting to open up more. And so I think that when one side is pushing this extremism with it, it's just so beyond where anybody is in, the real world, that it's not getting traction. It's just not.
So when Trump, as a populist leader, said the COVID isn't not a big deal, it's going to go away in a few
Just
days.
the flu.
Just a few, it's going to go down to zero.
We call that
And-
flu.
Yeah, right. And he was proven wrong. The populists on the left proved that their bad guy was bad, right? That's why they're so energized, because they proved that their bad guy was bad.
Bad at leading, you mean?
At
or
leading.
Bad at, okay.
And now, but I think the important point, so that's why they got so fired, okay? Because they got validation in their populism. Their billionaire and billionaire was actually an incompetent president who didn't even see this virus that was happening. He made a bad call. Okay.
I vote that David should do the entire panel in the voice.
Yes.
Because you do the whole panel in the voice.
Yes. I think what I'm hoping will happen. See, populism is vapid on its face, right? It's vapid. Us versus them, we're better than they are. Whoever they are and whoever we are, if that's the entire idea, it's vapid.
Well, it's an anti-elite, that the elites,
It's
they
us
have no
versus
skin
them.
in the game.
It's us versus them.
Yes, but the them is it's quite specific as the elites. It's not like nationalism, which is another them.
Yeah.
But
I think it's data free. Okay, there's no math behind it. And that's one of the things that you were saying before. I like data, and I want to be led by data. I don't want to be led by emotion. And I think that I hope that what people are going to see is that an us versus them, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys mentality, especially if it's a left versus right, which it is just useless on its face.
okay, let me challenge then. I want to bring Mike in here because you said you like data and the us versus them mentality. Do you think that after the whole lockdown of American cities for quite a few months, did the response by the government and the media to the George Floyd protests, Black Lives Movement protests, did that erode our trust in institutions?
Of course, but it couldn't have done that alone. The trust has been eroded and blown up and destroyed for such a long time coming. And I disagree a little bit because I think that you can find data to show that all of our institutions, so many of them now, are so corrupted and all believe the same things and are all pushing things that are just not true. For example, when, 100 medical groups signed a letter saying that it's totally fine to go protest for Black Lives Matter, but you
Right.
can't have a picnic of 6 people. So to me, that kind of is data to show that these institutions can't be trusted. And for me, there are definitely different types of populism. For me, it's a little bit difficult. I don't want to discount one side or the other, but it is a little bit difficult to take leftist populism seriously when they control every entity in this country.
You mean
point.
culturally, like the cultural institutions?
Every
media?
corporations, media, academia.
Okay, so that's a good point. So they're clamoring against the millionaires and the billionaires, but they're still in control.
And they are the millionaires and billionaires. Honestly, what don't they control? And that's a big thing because I used to hate Trump. I hated Trump. And at this point, I can't wait to vote. I'm going to pull that lever with my middle finger. But that was a big thing that decided my vote for this election, is that if you look at every powerful entity in this country, corporations, media, academia,
Entertainment,
everything.
Hollywood.
Yes,
Right.
everything. Except the federal government, they are all in alignment. They are all pushing the same party, the same ideology. They all want more control and more censorship. And for me, I feel like, can you imagine if we then put the federal government in alignment with all of those?
Yeah, so for me, and I'm not supposed to be talking about this right now, but so my wife is here. She's periscoping right now, and she is actually an immigrant, and she's originally born in Belarus, and so we see what's going on in Belarus right now, and it's so incredible to me that when we saw not just the protests here in the United States, but the violence, the incredible amount of violence that was going on night after night. I was in Chaz, I could tell you about the violence, guns stuck in my face. And then the institutions would come out the next day and say, oh, a peaceful protest was held, and it was just so peaceful, and everyone was nice, and they were, you know, chanting, and garlands of flowers were flying down from the skies, and meanwhile, as you were saying, right, as you were saying, you can see the videos night after night after night. And I thank so much the guerrilla journalists that are going out there
Hello,
every
Andrew.
single night that are in harm's way, that are getting tear gassed at sometimes, you know, but they're getting us this footage, and that's, you know, maybe people on the left, I don't care. If you're there filming, you're doing a public good and a public service. Yet we're told that those are peaceful. And then you can see in Eastern Europe, those are actual peaceful protests. And those are actual people that are going out and standing up in the face of this communist leftover regime. And you can just see you can see the dialectic where, okay, not only are you being proven wrong, we're showing you, and you can see in the videos, this is peaceful and this is not, and yet they still will not admit it. And that to me is incredible, but I also kind of love it because that's what makes populism grow.
But there's. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say there's so much gaslighting going on right now. I mean, first of all, I love when they say mostly peaceful protesters. I hate it. I forget who it was that said, yeah, OJ was mostly peaceful. It was just that one night.
All violence is generally momentary. I mean, everything's mostly peaceful until it's not.
But look at the gaslighting that they're doing in this election, where we see. I mean, to me, it is shocking. It is so unprecedented that you have a person running for president with a 50% chance of becoming president who doesn't know his wife from his sister, who doesn't know where he is half the time, who's falling apart. And their argument in this election is literally, you can't believe your eyes, you can't believe your ears, believe what we tell you. And I think that's just an extension of the peaceful protests.
That's their populism. That's their vapid populism.
Exactly.
They're not beating anything with data. They're just saying us versus them, the millionaires and the billionaires are bad guys. It's been a great. I've lived in Seattle for the past 2 years. I lived in downtown Seattle. Yeah, I moved there 2 years ago, and it was completely different from when it was 2 weeks ago when I moved out. The amount of homelessness and the amount of syringes on the ground is just it's really increased. And Third Avenue, which used to be a little testy, was, I mean, all boarded up, all graffitied, all closed. And the news never talked about it. The news never talked about it. We literally had a group of baseball bat wielding thugs walking through the city at night, smashing windows and mailboxes and public property. The cops knew, the cops watched, but the cops were under order not to interfere, and none of them were arrested. No charges were filed. It's insane.
I give so much credit, by the way, to Carmen Best, who's now the former Seattle police chief, for what she did. So when they, I know this is like totally off topic, but we're going there anyway. So sorry, Melissa. And she was ordered by the city council to fire 100 police officers, and she said she wouldn't do it. And the next day, she filed her resignation papers. Yeah. And she, as the first African-American woman to resign. And yeah, please give her a round of applause for this, because she's just standing up for common sense.
She should be
for
governor.
Normalcy, for rule of law. Oh, I would totally support her.
Yeah,
I would
she should be
absolutely
governor.
support her.
But that's exactly, like you said, that's how vapid their identitarian ideology is. You know, my friend Carrie Smith always says how they talk about, oh, black voices must be heard and gay voices must be heard. Not that black voice.
Right.
Not that gay voice. Not that trans voice.
Oh, my God.
And it's just voices that parrot their ideology to the T.
That's all they want.
And what you said, I mean, God, that's exactly how New York is becoming. It's shocking. I mean, I'm originally from Manhattan, was born and raised there. It's insane what's happening to the city.
And their solution is to fire cops.
Yeah.
And
The
I mean,
solution is to
First
fire
of all,
cops.
If anything, am I the only? Am I crazy? Am I the only person who thinks that we should be giving cops more money?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it should be a job that is very well paid and very difficult to get.
Well, you actually, this goes back to Singapore. That was the idea, is that if you pay public servants more, you get a better quality of public servant, rather than if you pay them less, then you get people who are sort of settling for that
yeah,
job.
it also weeds out corruption, and basically the Prime Minister of Singapore's pay is pegged to what a CEO would make.
Yeah.
So
It almost makes me wonder. Okay, I am the last person in the world who's any sort of conspiracy theorist, but I swear to God, this year is turning me into one, because it almost makes you wonder: are there certain people at the top that almost want there to be more mishaps and more chaos?
Oh yeah. I mean, the Black Lives Matter is not about black lives at all,
No.
right? It's about black criminals.
And they basically admit that.
Yeah. They don't, and nobody cares though. No. And so people follow them because Black Lives Matter. If you don't say that, then you don't like black lives. You must be a racist. I for one, I think black lives do matter. However, I think criminal lives matter much less than non-criminal lives. And I think, you know,
But that's
What you just said there, though, and we're talking about populism. So there's the populism of trying to find common good for the most amount of people, which basically what you said earlier on is the definition. But then there's the populism of a moral imperialist who is demanding that everyone submit to their form of moral judgment on not just individual situations like these, but also the system, onto how we should interact with one another, onto how we should vote, how we should live, how we should think, how we should feel. And that moral imperialism is very different than a type of populism that is organic. This is actually something that is being imposed on the rest of the world. And then, of course, because this is a false dichotomy of you're either with us or you're a bigot, right. Of course, the weak-kneed corporatists go along with it because, well, I don't want to get smeared as a bigot.
Right,
so,
of course.
So Pepsi is retweeting Media Matters videos, and you've got, every major corporation is out there telling you how much they care about social justice. Especially, I love the fast food companies doing this. They're like, we're going to clog your arteries, but at least we're not racist.
right.
But that's the geniusness of their politics, is that they fuse their ridiculous ideology together with people's identities to the point that they just hold us at gunpoint with our own identities.
Yeah, your intersectionality is your identity.
Yeah, and I mean, 81% of African Americans oppose defunding the police. But if you don't get on board with that, you're just a racist. So they convince you that the far radical leftist point of view is just the black point of view, the LGBT point of view, the women point of view, and it's not.
all right, but all this distrust that you're talking about, it's kind of politicizing medicine. It's politicizing science, and I think that's very dangerous, right? So, right now, science is supposed to be objective, but, people think of mask to mask or not to mask, to open schools or not to open schools, to do you like hydroxychloroquine? These are now decided by whether or not Trump supports any of these positions. And this is very, what do you guys think about this kind of situation that we're in, where we can't adjudicate, we can't even talk about, schools coming, right, fall's coming. How do we proceed? Because everything is politicized.
This goes back to what you were saying before about the mistrust of the institutions. I don't know who to believe. Nobody does. And so we're all just making it up. We don't know. Nobody knows. And as a person who's spent some time looking at this video and this video and this video, trying to figure it out, the amount of misinformation and disinformation is just everywhere. So I'm just trying to just do the safe way and just keep, because I don't want to hurt anybody, right? So I'm putting on a mask as much as I can and keeping my social distance just in case that's right. And I don't view it as oppression, although I can see why people would see it that way. I can see why people would see, people getting harassed. People are getting harassed. My girlfriend's getting harassed for wearing a mask at a gas station. So people are not only unaware of what the right thing to do is, but they're angry at people doing it the other way because of the politicalization.
Right.
Because if you wear a mask, you must be a liberal.
Right.
And I don't, and so
Or if you
this
don't,
is
well-
compounding the problem. It's just making the problem worse.
Well, see, there's actually something that preceded the politicization of science, and that was, among certain stripes, the deification of science, where there are people now who, and you find a lot of them on Reddit, if you spend a lot of time there, who, the I Love Science crowd, and they pour over every Bill Nye video, and they've got their bumper stickers, and
I actually was one of those.
It's okay.
But what's wrong with that?
I forgive you. Atonement.
So tell me about that. What's wrong with that?
Because science is about exploration. Because science is groping about in the dark and going on that journey of discovery. Science is not about consensus. It's not about 100
But there
scientists
is some
agree.
consensus. Like there are two genders.
Well, no,
Thank you, but that's
obviously, right,
controversial today.
But science it's about discovery of fact, right?
Yeah.
And yet, so there will be people then who come out when Dr. Fauci makes a statement, will then start throwing that in the face of anyone who disagrees with this statement, and as if like you're and using.
Oh,
this
so you're talking about
phrase-
deification of scientists.
Sure. Yes.
Okay,
Exactly.
okay. Well,
but
Right.
also
Right. Right.
the-
And then it's sort of it's become almost cult-like, right?
Yeah.
Where you can take any one statement by any one scientist that you happen to agree with because it's in line with your political tribe.
Kind of like religion, huh?
That's why I call it deification.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I call it deification.
Yeah.
And then taking this, so instead of looking at them as men and women of science, you're now looking at them as theologians, as preachers, as religious leaders, and saying, well, my doctrine is better than your doctrine, and so now we must fight. And this is not the role of science. The role of science is discovery, and it's changing our. We think about the scientific precepts that we had 100 years ago. Oh, it's curiosity. Yes, thank you. 200 years ago versus where we are now, and you can't lock into any one specific statement just because it agrees. And it's a constant exploration of data, the collection of data, the assessment, and then reassessment of it as we learn more things. That's science. But to use it as a cudgel to attack your political enemies, it flies in the face of what science is actually supposed to be about.
Well, let me disagree with you on that. I think you're right in that I think you're conflating the deification of science and the deification of scientists. But I think you're right, a lot of it. But when you have a consensus of current data, yeah, that should be used to bludgeon your opponent. I mean, if you have, yes, if you go back to what Dr. Fauci said back years ago or months ago and say, aha, that's still true today, well, that's bullshit. That's the deification of a scientist that you're talking about. That's exactly the same as going into the book of Matthew and saying Jesus said this and blah.
Right, and I'll even say that I'll even criticize the right a little bit because that's what they're doing when they say they disagree with Dr. Fauci today. They'll take something that he said months ago when he had
Right.
a certain set of data, and they say, "Oh, well, he said this back then." It's like, I know, like just
Right.
stop.
But
Right?
today,
Yeah.
if you look at the literal today, and you have the literal best data that you have today, and you have a literal consensus of scientists today, that is a tool to bludgeon your enemies because that's the best we have. That's the best information we have. That's our weapon against emotional decision making. That's the only weapon. That's the best weapon we have against emotional decision
Absolutely,
making.
but it should be done from a perspective of also understanding that
Science is fluid.
science is fluid.
Yeah.
I agree with
Not
what
like
you said,
gender.
but I agree with what you said that there should be consensus today, but I don't think that the politics of today should dictate the science of tomorrow. Because there was once a time where the Earth being flat was accepted science. So I feel like the deification that you're talking about of science, it sort of goes against the scientific method and goes against further exploring things and being curious about things and questioning things, which I think is needed. But so is what you said. So I don't freaking know.
There's actually a really good, that's actually kind of happening right now in among scientists who are trying to study the origins of the Wuhan virus. Right now it's like anyone kind of looking into this lab leak hypothesis, is it possible, gain of function research, it's kind of sidelined academically. It's like there's only one answer. When your range of acceptable opinion narrows, and when that corrupts science, that's when it's hard for truth to emerge.
Exactly what I'm talking about. Absolutely.
Well, and I think a lot of different issues that they all intersect when it comes to this sort of leftist corruption of science. This is something that I've been talking about for years that a lot of people didn't want to hear. I feel like you can draw a direct line from what's happening now with that to what we've seen over the last 5 years of young children transitioning genders, and that being so accepted where you literally have Brown University censoring studies and you can't research it, and you have it's all connected, basically. And that sort of ties into the populism, because that's what's happening at the top of all of our
Moral
institutions.
imperialism. It's moral imperialism.
Yeah.
How do you think this? What are your opinions then on reopening the economy and like shutdowns and things like that? Because we're still in this phase where it's like, okay, there are second spikes, and some cities that were fine initially are now re-shutting down, and there's talk about, as we head into fall, what's gonna happen.
I'll go straight into it. Show me the data that says you can go to Walmart, but you can't vote in person. Woo! Show me that science. Show me the data that says you can go to casinos and gamble, but you can't go to church and you can't vote in person. And it's anti-science, if you want to borrow a phrase, right? Now you're denying science, and even Dr. Fauci came out and said, right, to go back to, now I'm doing it, but Dr. Fauci said there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to vote in person, and yet it was like a blip. It was like that went against sort of this prevailing narrative of the moral imperialists, and so he comes out and makes that pronouncement, and then there's no headlines on it, right? And if you weren't on social media, which is the front lines now, if you weren't on social media, would you even know that Fauci has come out and said that?
I mean, I'll be voting I'll be voting by mail. Would you repeat the question, please?
Which, by the way, is also fine. It's always been an option. It's fine.
Right. And in Washington, it's all mail.
The question was about opening the economy.
Oh yeah. So I'm a left guy, okay? I'm a liberal guy, but I've got a pretty conservative view here, okay? We've got a 99% survival rate, okay? We've got the 1%.
But why is that a conservative view? That shouldn't be a conservative
Because
view.
if we have a 99% survival rate, that means the 1% who are in danger have the personal responsibility to shield themselves from this virus, and it's not my fucking problem.
Woo!
Okay?
Yes!
So, I'm sorry. If we were talking about a flu that has a 99% survival rate, we don't shut down the economy. The people who are in danger of catching the flu and dying shelter themselves. I'm sorry, it's not my responsibility. I'm taking responsibility for myself and my household. If I get COVID, I have a 99% chance of surviving. I'll be fine. There's a 40% chance I won't even know I've had it. That's my choice to make. My arms are gone. They're gone. Okay? I used to have big biceps, and I can't go to the gym, and it's pissing me off. So, I mean, I know this is an unpopular viewpoint because it's callous, right? It sounds callous. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that people are dying. They're dying at 1,000 people a day. That's 1,000 lives a day that are being lost from this. These are the people who have comorbidities, okay? Very, very few healthy people are dying from this. So,
well, you said this is unpopular, but I'm not even sure. It might actually be the populist position to want to open
Is it
the
unpopular?
economy.
I mean, I'm not. There's nobody in my household or in my orbit that is sensitive to COVID. There's nobody in my orbit that's going to die if they catch COVID from me. I'll wear a mask when I go out. I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't have a problem with that at all because I might be asymptomatic and I don't want to spread it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think that we should be shutting down the economy. I don't think we should be holding back schools. I don't think we should be doing this.
But think of what the elites are promoting, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a split. Obviously, the right wants to open in general, like on average, and the left does not.
The left doesn't want to open because their populists and their evil bad guy is Trump.
They probably don't want to open because, the
They'll
economy.
open November 4th.
Exactly. Well, if the economy is bad, they know Trump's not going to get reelected. So.
Yeah.
Right. So what you say is, and I would even take a more of a quote unquote traditional liberal perspective on this, is if you're someone who does have look, it's been 8 months now. We know so much more about this thing than we did back in January when I was translating videos out of China. So we know who's at risk. We have a much better understanding of that because we've done the science, we've collected the data. So if there are those people, then I'm perfectly fine with supporting them, with raising public funds to support those people to be able to say, look, if you've got to pull out of the workplace, then if there's some type of social safety net, some type of insurance for senior citizens, for the care that they're getting, set that up. For the love of God, stop putting infected patients in nursing homes with healthy people. Please stop doing this. If it is still going on anywhere, it's like the most common sense thing you could think of. And then going forward from there, yes, with basic, with basic protections, have the PPE, make that available. Look just how far we've come in 1 year. There's places right around here where we're all sanitizing our hands more, we're washing our hands more. Like, do you spend more time washing your hands now than you ever did, right? I think we're all doing that, right? So the awareness campaign actually worked. It worked very well. And so we've been able to flatten. I remember it was 15 days to stop the spread, and then it was 30 days. We've got to flatten the curve. It's been flattened. So if we've got to keep our foot on the brakes just a little bit, but you turn the ignition. You turn the ignition, but the brakes are still there if you need them.
Yeah.
Here's what bothers me. Like you said, do you guys remember the phrase 15 days to flatten the curve? It's been flattened. Here's what bothers me is that you have millions of people whose entire lives, careers, livelihoods were wiped out overnight. And we are not even part of the discussion. It is not even up for debate with these people. Here we are, 6 months later, with no end in sight. And we are given no answers. We are given no time frame. We are never told how long can we continue on this path? And when this started, I saw people saying, oh, these lockups, this quarantine could last for years. It could last the rest of our lives, and that's okay. We have to just adjust to that and get used to it. Bull fucking ass shit, I'm not getting used to that. So.
Well, the goalposts changed,
It's
right?
not even part of the discussion, though. I mean, and that's not even getting into people's mental health. 25% of adults 18 to 24 since quarantine started have contemplated suicide. How many hundreds of thousands of suicides and deaths of despair have we had? And it's not even a question. It's not even part of the discussion.
Yeah, I feel like the
They
goalposts
don't
definitely
care.
moved too. So if you're looking in the
There's
beginning,
like one infection now in some of these towns, and it's like this banner headline. We had an infection. We have to shut down everything again.
New
And it's like,
Zealand, right? They went
Yeah.
100 over days, no cases. All of a sudden, there were like 2, and then they had this toxic shock, just shut down the whole country again, and for two cases. I remember a time when we were told that the reason why we had to shut down and lock down was because we wanted to make sure the ICUs, we had enough capacity. That was the
Precisely.
reason.
That's what it was always about. It was about capacities. It was about ICUs. It was about relieving pressure on our healthcare system, right? This is what, if you go back to I'm from Philadelphia originally. The 1918 Spanish flu hit Philadelphia terribly. And it was because they went over capacity and people were dying in the streets, and it was just horrific. And so the idea was, okay, we're going to keep our hospitals as empty as possible so that they can deal with this because our personnel can deal with this. That's what it was always about. If they can keep it at capacity while we're reopening, then why would we still lock down?
I think it was initially about a virus, and I think at a certain point it became a giant power grab. And the virus itself is getting lost in it. I feel like there's almost a comparison to 9/11 with it, where 9/11 was obviously a very real thing. People died, but then that was used to justify all sorts of horrible things. The Iraq War, the Patriot Act. That's exactly what's happening now, I think.
All right, and actually the last question before we head to the Q&A portion of this. Right now the recession looks to be over for the rich. The stock market, housing market is booming. And the other day I looked at some data and it showed that sales of private jets are soaring. So Gulfstream has actually outsold Boeing for the first time in history. And so, the question
Round of
here...
applause for the 1%. Absolutely. Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness.
So the question here is because of this, impression that it's kind of affected everybody kind of differently, and the poor and the working class are still suffering for this. Do you think it's gonna further entrench populism? Because even though, even if people might have had the impression that, okay, maybe populists couldn't govern, they didn't manage this pandemic really well, the problem is that the inequalities and the economic powers, the way they're going to be concentrated post-COVID, it might deepen this need for populists again.
A friend of mine is Adam Townsend, and he said, he had this great quote. He said, which came first, the pandemic or the bailout? Because it seemed like the capital injection into financial markets came even before the pandemic really started breaking out on our shores. And even though it had already started in other parts of the world, and he's called it the fastest roll-up of power in history, because we're looking at so many. You can walk around Milwaukee and you can see places going out of business, and yet Jeff Bezos just keeps getting richer and richer day after day. And this inequality is going to create political pressures in this country that will convert more and more people into populism, sort of regardless of what anyone says about it. It's what's going to happen. That's going to be the net effect of this. And so whether or not the government or the elites, the sort of the government elite complex decides they want to turn a blind eye to those feelings and those emotions, is going to dictate what type of popular reaction is going to happen.
And I'm afraid of that. I am. I'm afraid of that. I think when you think about the long-term effects, when you think about the income inequality, then you actually bring in when you bring income inequality and the left is talking about it, you bring in the racism aspect, okay? Because poor equals black, and black equals oppression. So when you bring all of that in, and you combine it, who is the guy who tweeted, "I'm social distancing on my huge yacht," and then he had to delete the tweet?
Yeah.
Who was that?
Billionaire. He was in Mauritius or something.
Yeah, it's some and everybody, and so that kind of shit is, you're right. It's inevitable. He's right, and I'm afraid of what the ramifications are of that, because I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know if there will be a cry for redistribution. There will be a cry, and it'll be backed up by Black Lives Matter and racism. And if you don't believe in redistribution, you're a racist. It's all going to be a big mess, and it's all coming.
Which is why I think it is so crucial for the other side to address these issues that they've ignored for decades. It makes me so happy to hear people like you and Trump now talking about issues like income inequality and the disappearing middle class, because I've always felt that people like Bernie Sanders or the Occupy Wall Street movement, I've always felt that they hit upon some very valid issues. It's just that their solutions are batshit fucking crazy. So I think it's really important that we offer solutions to that, or the only alternative will be that. And I think that with the Republican Party, that's sort of been a constant recurring theme of theirs, that when they don't like Democrats' solutions to a valid problem, they just wash their hands of it and ignore it and offer no solutions, and we can't do that anymore.
No, you silence this stuff, and the pressures don't go away, and so then the question becomes: do you go Weimar Republic or do you go October Revolution?
Yeah, for a while it's felt like a choice between bad ideas on the left or no ideas from the Republican Party. So I think that's starting to change now, though. I think this has woken a lot of people up to it.
And also the decoupling. I guess the economies are going to, especially with anti-China sentiment so high now in the United States, and people just wanting to decouple our economies around the world. So in the struggle between populists and globalists, so to speak, the pandemic is probably going to shift the sentiment towards the populists.
Yeah, and I think there's also, to use the vernacular, the coronavirus has been an incredible red pill for a lot of people, that the government can't save you. The government is not always going to get everything right. So whether that's the government of Donald Trump or the government of Andrew Cuomo, that they are not going to have all the answers. And it's incredible to think, but in the normie world, right? they don't realize that. They don't even necessarily think that. Oh, if there's a pandemic, then the institutions will come, and that's why we have CDC, and that's why we have the NIH, and in every movie, the scientists always come, and then the military's there, and everything sort of works out at the end. Well, in real life, didn't seem to follow the Hollywood script, did it? And why is that? Oh, well, maybe because the government isn't always the best way to deal with everything. And actually, to your point earlier, with a lot of these, a lot of the Asian countries that dealt with this, in Taiwan, for example, I mean, they went directly to the private sector, and the government became more of a clearinghouse for good practices and good information, where it was the private sector that sort of fought this out very quickly, and then when they found the best solutions, they distributed very quickly, and that was the end of it.
So I think, there's about half an hour left, so I think we should open it up for questions so that it's more collaborative. This is supposed to be a discourse anyway.
Let's get some civil discourse going on.
Hey there, guys. My name's Adam. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to ask you guys a question on right-wing, left-wing populism. It's not going to be necessarily COVID related, but it's still between left-wing and right-wing populism. So a lot of big corporations got on left-wing populism, which is, I believe, is like things like social justice, activism, and stuff like that. And I think a lot of corporations like Nike are using that to mask some of their horrific labor practices in developing countries. Because even though they've gone woke, the stuff that they're still doing, the abusive labor practices in Bangladesh and other countries, are still there. Do you think that they're using this to mask some of their abusive labor practices that got suddenly swept under the table that Democrats used to champion? And they're using that to counteract some of the right-wing populism, which is trying to onshore many of these jobs back, but that would then shrink their profit margins.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing about this sort of social justice warrior ideology is it's basically an Instagram filter for humanity. It covers ugly pockmarks and zits with this pretty filter to cover it with, but they're still there, and the problems are still there, and it's a way of diverting attention from that.
The Occupy movement, and actually, if you look at the original, like 1999 or Battle of Seattle, the WTO, right? These folks were protesting globalism. They were protesting corporatism. They were protesting the IMF and the World Bank, and they were protesting the 1%. And now all of a sudden, the 1%, the corporatists say, "Oh, we're just going to parrot your values, and we're going to post something on Instagram." And suddenly you say, "Yeah, I love you, corporation. You're my best friend." And they immediately stop. And then they go attack somebody else. And that's something where, and this is what you were speaking to, where Trump and right-wing populism have become sort of a punching bag for the populist left and corporatism to sort of channel their energy and redirect it away. And I just wonder if there's any folks who remember, were members of the Occupy movement from about, it was a decade ago at this point, and then say, "Hey, wait a minute, didn't we used to fight against you guys? Like, why are we on the same side now?"
I mean, I had a conversation with a preacher maybe 3 months ago, and he was a preacher who managed one of my old debating opponents, and he told me, "I hope someday that we get to argue about something as low and unimportant as whether God exists again."
Wow.
I mean, that's what he said. I mean, we're on the same side now. We
So
put
true.
that stuff to the side. Yeah, he believes in a man in the sky, and I don't. Let's talk about free speech.
Yeah.
Let's defend free speech. The answer to your question is absolutely yes. It's virtue signaling, and it's a mask. And a lot of corporations are doing it. I see the virtue signaling, everywhere. When I go on Amazon and I see the Black Lives Matter movies listed there, it's all virtue signaling. It's all to hide it. And one thing that we all must remember is it's not just corporations doing it. Human beings do it too. Real shitty human beings out there are carrying the anti-racism flag because they are hiding shit in their closet.
It's always, people who virtue signal are always covering up their own utter lack of virtue. Quick funny story. This just happened to me the other day, but this person was who I used to know. I think we went to high school or something, and she's commenting, using all these slurs, "you fag," all this stuff because I defended J.K. Rowling. And so you look at her page, and every single thing, Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, her description is literally, "I believe in equality and human decency." And I realized, I'm like, wait, didn't we go to high school? Her name sounds familiar. I remember her. So I search back in my Facebook and I look at why I unfriended her and I see a screen cap of her post. This was from like 2012, 2013, right before social justice became the trend. And I see her post that's like, this damn N-word cab driver, N-word, N-word, N-word. I'm like, that's the thing, is that it's a cover. These people, if the moment that they have a disagreement with somebody who happens to be gay or black or any sort of minority, you will see that when people see other human beings primarily as their race, gender, sexual orientation for positive, progressive reasons, eventually the ugly, bigoted, hateful reasons beneath that will reveal themselves.
A lot of this is so it's you get something called the white savior complex,
Yes.
and the white savior complex is actually just white man's burden from the 19th century, which has been updated for the 21st century in social media. So it's this idea that only white people can save these poor, unfortunate colored people from their circumstances. I mean, and this was actually, when they talk about colonialism, this actually was the avowed reason for so many people that that colonialism was required, because of it was quote unquote white man's burden.
Yeah. Which is basically just racism.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and I just want to say too, I'm so happy to hear you talk about corporatism, because I really think it is time that we have a mass educational campaign to the public on the difference between corporatism and capitalism. Because thank you. Nobody, especially kids in colleges and schools, of course they're becoming socialists. I understand why it happens. They don't know what capitalism really is. They've grown up under this system where there are different rules for each of us. And it's time we have a return to actual capitalism.
Well, and that's I would love to, and that's a problem with the education system. That's where it's too bad Peter's not here, because he could get into a rant.
Is that also why all these students are joining OnlyFans?
No, that's because they're just fucking whores. I mean, from one whore to another.
Excuse me, seeking arrangements.
Seeking arrangements.
Okay, great conversation so far. I want to pick on David a little bit, because I think you're conflating tribalism with populism, especially in your introduction of it, when you're saying like there's these right populists and there's left populists.
Okay.
And I think that there's a major schism on the left, right, between the elites and actually the left populists. And the elites are largely parroting that thing, but you can see it quite evidently. Like with Kamala Harris, right? Kamala, both the right-wing populists and the left-wing populists are really united on their disdain for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
So there is a common thread there. My question there is, do you think that it may have something to do with the left needing institutional? Their solutions all required big government and institutions. So they have to defer to the billionaires or the institutional science, whatever. The right populism, their solutions all deal with like individual bootstrapping up. So you'll see the difference in approaches, and the deferment of the left to the populists has more to do with the fact that ultimately they need to trust government. They need to trust the authorities. Whereas the right, their solutions don't require that, but they're both populist in the sense they're both speaking to those same underlying stresses of the common people.
Right. I mean, I guess that's. You were. I was going to say something really clever, and then you said something, and I forgot it. I hate it when that happens. I haven't even been smoking today. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm really sorry. Why don't you jump in?
I will throw one thing at you, though, is that there is a difference in the right. There's a split on the right between sort of the populists and sort of the conservatarian right, the corporatist right, where normally and traditionally, absolutely right. People on the right would say, get government out of the way and let free market do what it will. But at the same time, and I don't know how many people realize this. We're actually staying over at the hotel here, and there's a plaque. It's the site of where Teddy Roosevelt was shot. in I think 1912, and Teddy Roosevelt was a guy who came in and said there does come a time where for the growth of freedom to continue, you do need to get government involved to breaking up monopolies. And because monopolies do stifle free market competition and that wonderful, beautiful friction that creates innovation. And so there is a huge monopoly in this country right now coming out of Silicon Valley, and it's called the big tech cartel. And that's a place where you will also find agreement between the populist left and the populist right that government should get involved to unravel this.
And I did remember what I was going to say, and that is that one of the things that I've found as I've been doing this is that the populism from the left, like I said, it's quite vapid. A lot of people are claiming and screaming and yelling without data. And that's one of the things that pushed me away from the left. And I think that the reason that they depend on those institutions is for validation. It's akin to idea laundering that Peter put out, where the idea is justified by the process, not because the process is slightly skewed wrong. If you have a populist left with an ideology, and that ideology has no backing to it, but major corporations adopt it because those people are run by elite leftists who don't want to be called racists, that legitimizes the ideology in and of itself. And so that might be a reason why the left populism depends on institutions more than the right.
I'm really hoping that what's next in politics, I don't think it'll be anytime soon, honestly, but maybe in the next 10 years or so, that there can be some sort of coming together of the populist left and the populist right. I think before that happens, the identitarian radical left just needs to be totally burnt to the ground first. But I do think there is a lot of overlap. I have a friend who's like the biggest Bernie Sanders supporter, but he's not woke, he's not a socialist, where he said to me, it feels like we're on the same side. It feels like we're fighting for the same things. And I feel like that's true in a way that, whether you call it the 1% or the deep state, many of the targets of our ire can be and should be the same. And I've heard a lot of people arguing about whether Kamala Harris, whether she's far left radical or if she's a neoconservative, whatever. She's simultaneously both and neither, because I feel like these sort of labels of left and right are ultimately becoming meaningless. And what really matters is, are you an authoritarian or are you a libertarian? Are you a populist or whatever, what's the answer? Or corporatist, thank you, I'm brain dead. But yeah, I think that's ultimately what matters more.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris. I've been here a few times.
Hi, Chris.
Hey.
Please pardon my crippling social anxiety. I've had a rough year.
I feel you, bro.
So we were talking about wealth injections, right? In the light of the COVID. Yes, I apologize. We were talking about wealth injections in light of the pandemic and COVID-19 and all of our resources being pretty much whacked out of orbit. I'm pretty sure we're seeing already one of the largest redistributions of wealth in history. I've seen money changing hands from private corporations to governments, from governments to the people, and it's really hard to track all the money, but it is what it is. I think I'm seeing a trend of like a sliding scale based upon the disasters and relief efforts that we have in our country. I'm from Michigan. A lot of the stories you've probably heard about COVID patients being sent to retirement facilities came from my state. Thank you, Governor Whitmer. Excuse that.
Cuomo, too.
Oh, boy. Can't remember where I was going with this. No. So in light of this, I've noticed that there's been severe budget cutbacks to send these stimulus packages and all these unemployment checks out. We've cut policing by, I want to say we cut about 25% of our policing budget. I don't have the exact figures on me, but I remember having to go through this with my girlfriend. What are your thoughts on this? I don't know what you'd call it, like a redistribution of wealth. Is this something that you've already seen? Like, is it something that you'd be comfortable calling?
Well, what
redistribution
you're
of wealth?
really seeing, even more than that, is that we're now seeing a redistribution of ownership in this country, because we are seeing now that because people haven't been able to make they can't make rent payments, they can't make mortgage payments. You're seeing the brick and mortar stores, mom and pops, going out of business. And then who's able to come in? It's Bezos, it's Wall Street, it's Paul Singer, it's these vulture capitalists that are now able to come in, and maybe we should use the word corporatist for them, but they're able to come in because they have this essentially free money that they've been given through these wealth injections, that they can gobble up all of these properties, they can gobble up Right. Yeah, de Blasio has basically stated this, right, as a plan of action, a course of action for New York City. When you realize that it's taking so much of what people have worked for so long in some of these instances to be able to keep going through everything that's going on, and then they lose it through no fault of their own. And regardless of necessarily what your feelings are on the situation, it's going to create social pressure, and it's going to create income inequalities. And when you see that Gini coefficient get ratcheted up, and the Gini coefficient tracks income inequality in distribution in a population, that's when you see destabilization, that's when you see government corruption, that's when you see crime in the streets. And back in February, believe it or not, back in February, I said, if this doesn't stop, we are going to see LA riot type events happening across the United States in major cities. And come this summer, look what happened.
That's where we're at. I think that's pretty much all I can get out right now, but I do believe we're missing a certain B word. But that's... No. Farewell and have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Am I stupid? What's the word?
Hi, Thomas.
Hey, love the discussion that we're having here.
Hey.
So
Yo, hey, Thomas.
I'm about to throw a word bomb here onto the stage. So, as school is starting to open up now, certain states are debating what institutions need to open, what institutions should stay closed. Different states have different policies depending on the politics. While the following institution I'm going to mention has certain programs, depending on the specific program, that could help people in local communities, people in need, various matters like that. In the United States of America right now in the age of COVID, if you are maybe in a blue state and you're trying to say that we should only keep essential businesses open, are churches essential?
No, they're not essential. People like churches. There's nothing essential about a church. The only thing that a church, I got to put on my old hat here, right? The only thing a church is good for is going out of business and maybe paying property taxes afterward. I have not swayed in my opinion at all that churches are useless and toxic and really, yeah. All religion does deserve to die, and that's my statement, and I'm sticking to it.
I wouldn't expect you to say otherwise. That being said, the First Amendment to the Constitution grants churches the freedom to stay open. And if you are, as a government, are enabling, by the way, other institutions or other organizations to be open. So we talked earlier, Walmart. We talked earlier about casinos. And if they're able to stay open within certain social distancing guidelines and with certain recommendations to stop the spread, and then you're singling out churches, that actually does go against the First Amendment protection.
I do agree with that.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. That's true. You can't discriminate against people or against religion. You asked if they were essential.
Like, if a casino, right, which is not essential,
Yeah,
which
why
is
is
a
a
gaming
casino?
business is open, then yeah.
Oh, I know.
If a casino can open, a
still
church
man
should be
my
able to
I
have
just wanted to
services.
get
Yeah.
this discussion going.
Yeah. If a casino's open, I mean, if we can have this, why in the world can't the church do exactly this, right?
They were saying that you couldn't have drive-through or drive-in churches, right? And this was, we've got a drive-in movie theater open in D.C. area, so you could. And they came up with this idea. They said, why couldn't we have a drive-in church and people come in and they have a loudspeaker, but people stay in their cars? And there were some states that were saying you couldn't do that, but it's like, okay, this is not science now. This this is persecution.
I will say I used to be like David, but in terms of the firebrand, like church is not essential.
Same.
But I've definitely come around to this, like, what if this need for humans, the need to worship and for spiritual sustenance is so universal that we could tear down all the religions and look what new religion has resurfaced.
The heathens will be converted.
That's my
I
that's
think,
my learning.
I'm not religious at all, but I think when you have sort of what's happening but there's no basis of any sort of common belief amongst people, I think religion gets replaced with something worse, and that's what's happening now. People worshiping themselves.
Well, this is
worshiping
what
government.
Nietzsche predicted, and a lot of people read Nietzsche and think that he was saying God is dead, and his point, that was actually his central thesis, was that when you destroy religion, you replace it, and then it's replaced with nothing, right? When you go through that process, it's going to tear society apart.
Okay, this question is for Mr. Posobiec because
Yes, sir.
you have contacts in intelligence internationally. While we've been paying so much attention to COVID and Portland and Antifa and BLM, have you detected any rumblings internationally of something else fixing to happen? I ask this because since the COVID started, I've been working 7 days a week, and in the last month, 12-hour shifts. And I work on avionics for military attack helicopters. And there's not just for our government, but for other governments. And there are certain types I've seen before, but not in the numbers I'm seeing lately. And my income has doubled and tripled. So it's like, I'm wondering, is there something fixing to happen internationally?
Well, geostrategically, and God bless you for working as hard as you do, sir. And thank you. I mean, that's amazing. And geostrategically, there's a situation going on right now where sort of while the cat's away, the mice will play, right? And so while the United States is bogged down with domestic troubles and issues, this has allowed many other of the United States' adversaries to essentially have a free hand, knowing that the U.S. is going to be so bogged down with our issues that they will then be able to push out into other realms. And so you've seen a little bit of this with the flare-ups in the border fighting, the clashes between India and China. You're also seeing this a little bit, certainly with Hong Kong, everything that happened there. China essentially realized that their soft power, push throughout the world had been destroyed through all of their own malfeasance, and so they said, "Screw it, we're just going to take Hong Kong 25 years early," and so they did.
And Taiwan, the Straits of Taiwan and South China Sea too is heating up militarily. So.
Well, yeah, and that's they want to take Taiwan next. Now, the difference is that Taiwan has a military. They can certainly put a much more of a hurt on China. That being said, you cannot change the geography of East Asia. Hong Kong will always be in the mouth of the dragon situated there in the Pearl River Delta. Taiwan will always be right across the very short strait from Fujian province. And so, the United States and certainly the world has to really ask itself, okay, what's the price tag,
All right, so my question is for David in particular. In relation to your statement that 1% or whatever is going to, that they're susceptible to coronavirus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That it's not your fucking problem.
Yeah.
Well, then the question rises, then what is? What besides the self and how we handle ourselves, because you wear your mask when you go out and things like that. Whenever we're talking about like the corporatism and populism, I saw that you were particularly quiet. So I was thinking, what is an individual's responsibility here? Sure, we can make it the whole discussion here is, oh, the government's making some people do things and not other things and whatnot. So what, in your opinion, would be the personal responsibility? And does that reflect a greater responsibility for the whole of
the United States or the world in that case?
Oh, that's a good question. So I base my, because you asked me my personal opinion. So I base my morality on humanism, and I base my humanism on a pseudo-objective good of reducing suffering, and I call it a pseudo-objective good because there's no such thing as objective good, but. So I try to do what I can to reduce suffering and to improve humanity. That's my meaning of life. That's what I try and do, and that's what I think we all do. So that's why I wear a mask. That's why I wash my hands. It's a 99% survival rate. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to make anyone suffer. I don't want to make anyone die. I don't want to make anyone die. But I don't want to make anyone die, yet I still drive a car. And there's a chance that I'll kill somebody if I drive a car. I don't want to kill anybody, but I still, live my life. I still do things which do pose risks to other people. And those other people, all the other people, live with that risk. So I think the personal responsibility is mitigating other people's exposure to the best of your ability without losing, there's a gray area there. There is a gray area. We all make the same, like I said, cars. We could stop people from dying in car accidents tomorrow. All we have to do is outlaw cars. But we're not going to do that. So we all make the collective decision. Yes, people are going to die in car accidents tomorrow, but I want to drive my BMW. Okay, we all make that decision. And we all make that decision about multiple things all the time, and this is one of them. This is that sliding scale. Where does the I'm going to protect other people line cross with I'm going to live my life line? And those other people have the personal responsibility of protecting themselves. I may have been too crass when I said it's not my fucking problem, but it's not my problem to protect your grandmother, okay? I want to protect your grandmother. I don't want your grandmother to die, but it's not my responsibility to protect her. It's not my responsibility to wear a hazmat suit so your grandmother can go to Walmart. If your grandmother is susceptible, she shouldn't go to Walmart. And if you're going to expose her, you should take the precautions for that. If you live with her, and especially if you live with her, and that's something that we almost do. This is that place. This is one of those places where we have to balance our rights and our personal interests against the personal safety of others. And I believe the key variables in that is humanism on my side and personal responsibility on everyone else's.
The way to solve pandemics is easy. I can solve them quite directly. We're all going to now live in pods. And our bioelectrical chemistry will power a large system of a virtual simulation that we'll all be hooked into, and that will keep us safe from not only pods but also various other pathogens. I mean, you can go down that path, right? And that's
Don't give them ideas.
Right.
This is going to be in the DNC platform now.
We will be fed a nutrient paste made from insects.
No, I agree with you, though. I think the best thing that you could do for others and for your community is to be good to yourself and to be responsible with yourself.
All right, we have 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure both of you get your questions in.
Okay, quick question on, again, starting with David. You said that when we're talking about science as sort of like a religious or as a moral authority, you mentioned individual scientists. Oh, it's not science, it's individual scientists you're talking about. I think it's really the institution of science that's been deified, as Jack was pointing out. So, and this institutional deification, I don't know if anyone's familiar with like the tradcons, but they have this notion of they call it the cathedral, where it's the social institutions, like there's this consensus of the elites, and that's what you can't go get. So like Melissa said, with her observation that going into or investigating the research on the origins of the virus, it's very focused on what conclusions scientists are allowed to reach or what research will be funded for that. So that's really my question there. Like, as I think that there are lots of individual scientists who are asking the right questions, want to do the right research, but there is also this institutional force, so this consensus, the social consensus that's created by different things. What do you think about
So
that?
there's a lot of conflation here. I mean, data is data. The best data that we have is the best data that we have. It's the best information that we should go in. But there is that factor that you're talking about. Again, I'll just talk really briefly about what Peter Boghossian wrote in the idea of idea laundering. The idea is that peer review itself has been corrupted. Peer review has been corrupted. If I write something and I want to submit it to peer review, the idea is that I'm going to submit it to a whole bunch of people who are going to try and prove me wrong, and then they fail. And when they fail to prove me wrong, it's considered that I'm right. But the way it is now is that I submit something, especially if I'm far left, I submit something on the far left, and instead of them trying to prove me wrong, they just decide if they agree. And that peer review is a different, very corrupted, very one-sided, very non-scientific peer review that really dirties the water and messes everything up. And I think that goes to what you're saying with corporatism, with corporations defining and deciding what science can be reviewed and what science can be pushed. And that is definitely a corrupting factor. My problem is that science is still right as it gets. The institution of science is kind of a vague thing for you to say. I understand where you're going, but I'm still quite married to the idea that the best science is the best answer that we have. That's the best data. But yes, because we must consider the fact that some other data might not be presented to us. Some other data might not even be mined for us. And
I mean, remember in, as early as, or I should say as late as the early 90s, there was no science that smoking causes cancer, right? This was the corporatist line again and again.
I remember that.
Yep.
And I think we're talking about the same thing essentially.
Yeah.
We may not have all the right terms for it yet, and we'll get there. But it's this idea that suppressing of data and suppressing of science and getting science to the masses because of this cathedral effect, that is what we need to fight against, and that is a pro-science view.
Right, and so
Absolutely
this is the nuance that we have to worry about. It has to be, if we're going to fight against corruption in science, we have to do it with a pro-science view.
Absolutely.
We can't say, okay, well, science is bad because it's corrupt.
Right.
Let's go to religion. We can't do that, and there's going to be a push for that. Somebody's going to say, aha, your data is corrupt. Let's ditch all the science. We have to do this with a pro-science view so that we keep looking for data. We don't dismiss the data that we have.
I want to get to the last really quick.
First of all, great first panel. You guys are great.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
enjoyed this. As
We
a
know,
public
we know.
educator for over 3 decades, I've watched the teachers union slowly bite off their nose to spite their face. I think they're going to finally do that. One of the major things I think we're going to see is way more school choice coming out.
Yeah.
I was just curious, aside from school choice becoming much more popular with people that were formerly on the left, what other major type of impacts do you see in the next 5-10 years of those type of issues that are going to be like, wow, how did that happen to some people, and other people, obviously, this is why?
I mean, I think cities are done. I think
Yeah.
the concept of the city is done. I think people are certainly going to move out if they have the means, and potentially new communities will be built. You're starting to see this in the South, where they're just building out completely planned communities, and then sort of pricing themselves out of the general population. And we're going to move to more of that, and that's just going to happen, right? That's not even something that is really. I mean, it's been decided. It's going to happen.
I mean, they're just chasing us out of there. It's insane. There's no way to basically exist or even to be able to afford to today in cities. I mean, I think in the near future, I think Trump is going to be reelected, and I think they're going to be more shocked than they were last time.
I think religion's going to go further out. I think religion's going to go further down, and I'm really happy about that. I am, however, worrying about what you both said about what's going to be the response to that. And I'm very worried about the rise of wokeism. I'm very worried about the liberal minimization of the impact of the woke crowd. I'm getting that a lot. I'm getting a lot of leftists calling me and telling me, oh, that's a minority, it's a vocal minority. Meanwhile, Seattle is firing 100 cops. Meanwhile, Seattle is putting racism into the math courses, anti-racism. So I am very afraid of, well, I'm afraid of what the left is morphing into. And I think if we're going to see a wow, how did that happen? I think it's going to be on the left side of the ticket because I think a whole lot of leftists, a whole lot of liberals are downplaying the leftists, and I think they're wrong.
I always say when
We all have a common foe.
Yes.
We do.
I always say when people try to say that they're like, oh, those people, they're a minority, they're not that powerful. I always tell them, okay, great. So then why don't you go on your Facebook right now and post one thing that disagrees with them? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm like, yeah, you know why, because you know the control and the power that they have
That's
over
right.
people.
I mean, I'm living proof. I lost my career.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.